Hi, my name is Peter and welcome again to the workshop here at Sunny Beaches. The purpose of today's video is to talk about one of the enhancements that I've made to my MiniMax CU300 combination woodworking machine. And that enhancement is this, a stock feeder. This idea did not originate with me. Somebody else thought it up. And they helpfully put a post up on the Yahoo Group's MiniMax forum and even put up some pictures, as I recall. And that was very helpful. I wouldn't have thought of this on my own, and I certainly wouldn't have dared to do it if somebody else hadn't done it first. So I did this project several years ago. I don't really recall how long it's been. And so the process of researching and deciding on a model is mostly forgotten. But for whatever reason, this is the model that I eventually chose. The brand is Delta. The specific model is 36-850. It is 1/4 horsepower, operates on 110 volts, has 3 rollers, which are reversible. It has 4 speeds. You select the speed by inserting the proper combination of gears. So one of the big questions I had when I was shopping around for this project is, would 1/4 horsepower be enough? And the answer, I'm happy to say, is yes, it is. That's a good thing, because 1/4 horse will run off of 110, and I don't have that many 220 circuits available. So there are, of course, other brands and models out there, and you'd have to do your own research on those. So one of the first questions you might ask about this is, doesn't it get in the way? And the answer is no, in the case of the shaper, the jointer, the planer, and the mortiser. Although it's a close thing with the planer. To use the planer, of course, the jointer tables have to rotate up, and that's a pretty tight fit. And that's more by luck than design and careful planning. But it does work. So the answer, though, is yes, it will get in the way when using the table saw. Anytime you need more than about 9 inches of clearance to the right of the blade. And so it does have to be removed frequently. And so I'll show you how that happens. So that wasn't too bad. Actually, the worst part of removing the stock feeder from the unit is finding a place to put it. And I don't really have a good one, so now it's in the way someplace else instead of being in the way here. So now that it's off, this would be a good time to talk about how it's mounted. The base of the stock feeder is mounted to the table of the CU300 with 4 machine screws. In this case, that's a 10mm screw, 1.5 pitch. To accommodate the screws, of course, we needed holes drilled and tapped into the tabletop. I don't have a lot of experience with this kind of thing, and so that was a scary process. There was a drilling template that was provided with this model, which was helpful. When you're picking a spot to mount the stock feeder, you need to keep a couple of things in mind. One is you want a location that's kind of central geographically on the machine to maximize the utility and usefulness of the unit. Second, you want it positioned so that it doesn't interfere with the hood and fence attachment for the shaper, or with raising the jointer table. And the last thing is you want to be aware of where the ribs are underneath the tabletop. And you want to avoid those ribs. You don't want to be drilling into a rib. So there's one about here in this case and one about here. So I drilled 6 holes altogether to give me an option of 2 positions for the mounting base unit, but I find in fact that I really only use the one position here closer to the edge. So as I said, I did all this some years ago and have forgotten some of the details about how I actually went about this. I did start with a small diameter drill bit and worked my way up incrementally to the target size. I used a block of wood as a guide, both for keeping the holes perpendicular to the tabletop surface and for positioning the holes. So so those holes would start out perpendicular in the block of wood. I made the first set of holes on my drill press. So and then I just left that block of wood clamped to the top, and when it came time to do the tapping, I tapped through the block of wood down into the cast iron. And I'm pleased to be able to say that that all worked out fairly well. To continue talking about the stock feeder, I have to put it back on. The stock feeder can be used in conjunction with the table saw for ripping cuts, the shaper, and the jointer. And I use it most frequently with the jointer, so we'll start there. Some people are surprised that you can use a stock feeder with a jointer. The concern is that if you had a cupped board, pressure from the stock feeder would tend to flatten it out as it passed over the cutter head. And then after it's passed, it would spring back to its original shape. And if that were happening, you could never achieve a flat surface. And if you were jointing a board that was thin enough, that probably would happen. But in my experience with a 1-inch material, there isn't enough pressure to flatten the board out. So jointing with the stock feeder works just fine. When using the stock feeder with the jointer, you want it positioned so that it's entirely over the outfeed table. And you want it canted slightly toward the fence so that the last outfeed roller is a little closer to the fence than the first outfeed roller. The manual suggests about 1/4 inch closer. To reduce flex and stress on the fence, I use the stop rod. When setting up the stock feeder for use with the table saw, the manual recommends that the center of the blade be between the middle roller and the rear roller. You also want to make sure that the blade is not going to hit any part of the stock feeder. Once again, the rear roller should be about 1/4 inch closer to the fence than the front roller. And the stop rod should be used to prevent any flex in the fence. When setting up the stock feeder to work with the shaper, this particular model has a problem. The head will not rotate a full 360 degrees because the motor hits the horizontal arm. And because of this, the best we can really do is to set up the stock feeder along the shaper fence here closer to the front end of the machine. And when I do this, I'll generally set up the shaper so that I feed stock through from the back of the machine. Until now, we've been talking about using the stock feeder with lumber that's in a horizontal orientation, work surface flat against the table. But it can also be configured to work with wood in a vertical orientation, on edge. And to do that, you rotate 90 degrees, like so. So now, in theory, you could set up the stock feeder to be used for edge jointing. But edge jointing is pretty easy to do, and I can't imagine that I would ever take the time to set it up to do that. But I can imagine that would be useful in conjunction with the shaper. Note that in this orientation, the motor no longer hits the arm, so a full 360 degrees of rotation is possible. So there you have it, a stock feeder on a MiniMax CU300. I find that in practice, I don't use this as often as I thought I would. It can be a little fussy to set up and may not be worth the time it takes unless you're doing a larger batch. And I generally don't do large batches. And it has an unfortunate tendency to creep out of position, with the result being that work pieces would not be kept up against the fence, which can result in a ruined workpiece, which can result in a ruined day. But I do use it pretty much all the time when I'm doing face jointing. Because it really does make that job easier. And in the case of face jointing, it doesn't matter if it creeps out of position a little bit. A workpiece that isn't kept up against the fence when you're face jointing, isn't ruined as a result. So you can just readjust and go on. So that pretty much wraps up this topic. Thanks for watching.